We have been reading Peter Attia's Outlive for our and chatting about it and checking in on it in our group sessions. So for today's meeting, we're supposed to read chapter 4, 5, 6, right?
Three. Oh
Uh,
yeah, 4, 5, 6. Yeah.
4, 5, 6 of part 2. So in the initial chapters, he talks about the four horsemen and the diseases of aging. And chapter 4 is about the centenarians and what's special about the centenarians and citing some really interesting ones. And the longest lived human was 122 years old on record. And she smoked and she drank and she was French and she sounds like she was a character. Actually, a lot of these super centenarians had some kind of vice, and it seems like, oh, maybe that's the thread, that but maybe do they live in spite of the vice? And in this chapter, he describes genetics playing a strong, strong role in conferring benefits towards speed of aging. Uh, for example, with things like osteoporosis that develop at a particular age for women, they're happening a lot later for these centenarians. So they just like the delay in aging, which is something that I do in the True Diagnostic Test, something that Brian Johnson, multi-millionaire Brian Johnson is obsessed with on his leaderboard, and he wants to be number one in his speed of aging, but he isn't yet. He's in the top 10, but he's not at the top. So we actually don't really know for certain what it is about the centenarians that confers the best benefits. It's probably a combination of a whole bunch of things. But two of the genes that he talks about, one is APOE, which is a cholesterol transport gene, and it's APOE. The old version of the gene is the 4 allele, and the 4 allele is strongly connected to the development of Alzheimer's, especially if someone were to follow a modern day diet. But the other one that he talks about a lot, and there's a bunch of longevity genes, but the other one that he mentions in chapter 4 is FOXO3, FOXO3. It's not in the nutrition genome or the 3x4. They don't test for FOXO3 in that report. They do test ApoE, both tests for that. But what you can do if you have your raw data, and I believe you do have your raw data, Kelly, but
Hmm.
if you have your raw data, you can upload your raw data to Prometheus, and that then you can plug in the genes you want to know about, and you can look up your FOXO3, and doing that costs $12. It's very, very inexpensive. So if anyone listening to this recording is interested in looking at some of that and has the raw data, we can do that together. And so moving on to the next chapter, which is about the discovery of rapamycin. So it's more about it segues into longevity. I think the history of rapamycin is so fascinating. In fact, there was an excellent podcast on Radiolab
Hmm.
several years ago. There's ice cream, the like dirty tub of ice cream is in the title. Basically, rapamycin was discovered on Rapa Nui, which is part of Easter Island, kind of why they have the statues with the heads facing the sky. And a bit of dirt ended up on the desk of this one scientist, Indian-born, who had emigrated to Canada. So, and he was working for a big pharmaceutical company doing research for them. And what he discovered when he studied this dirt was that it had incredible healing properties. And and the podcast, the Radiolab podcast, tells the story so well, but the pharmaceutical company shut down and told him to destroy everything that he was working on, but he did not. He put this dirt in the freezer in an ice cream tub, and he just labeled it like "do not eat" and smuggled it into the United States. And so when he took this new job in Princeton, New Jersey for a different pharmaceutical company, and they asked him like, what cool things are you working on? He pulled this back out. And so the way the story is told in the podcast is very, very exciting. So I highly recommend anyone go back to Radiolab and find this like dirty ice cream tub podcast. So good. But and the scientist himself, he named it Rapa after Rapa Nui, and then mycin, which means it's like antimicrobial agent. So he named it Rapamycin in honor of Rapa Nui, and he originally thought it was going to help solve like toe fungus, but ultimately the FDA approved it for uh, organ transplant because they learned that it suppresses the immune system, and so like an overly active immune system is suppressed, and so it is prescribed to organ donor patients or like recipients. But it wasn't until David Sabatini came along, his research really figured out how what rapamycin was doing in the body. So that's when that mechanism was figured out, and they named that mTOR, so mechanistic target of rapamycin. So they named it that, where what's happening is cellular responses are suppressed and certain aging processes are suppressed as well. And sorry, let me turn my phone off. And something that we know is that mTOR increases when it's sort of upregulated when we eat. And it's also upregulated when we're in a caloric surplus, because it creates growth. So, like my dogs, Kismet and Moxie, they take something called cyclosporine, but cyclosporine does a similar thing to rapamycin in that it suppresses their immune system a bit because they have hyperactive immune systems to this environment here, and because it's not where they're from, and they have a hyperactive immune system that actually causes all kinds of skin allergies and pustules on their paws and stuff. So the medication calms that inflammation and that inflammatory response. So that's also what rapamycin does. It calms the inflammatory response. And that scientist developed lung cancer, and he started taking rapamycin himself, and he went into remission like immediately from the cancer. And he but then the moment he went off the rapamycin, it came back. So that's very interesting. But no human studies have been done with rapamycin, but there is a dog study. I'm actually not quite entirely sure it's still going on or if it was shut down by the government, but I know that Peter Attia mentions that he was also an investor in that study at the publishing of his book, which was only a couple
Hmm.
of years ago. So it's possible it's still going on, but I think I heard through the grapevine that they might have shut it down. So, which is too bad because we all want our pets to live longer. And
Right?
so if there's a way to dose, apparently dosing the rapamycin in such a way where it's pulsed and not something every day, um, is what promotes the aging, like the longevity benefits. So, the opposite of mTOR is AMPK. So, AMP kinase is heightened in a state of caloric restriction. It senses a depletion of nutrients. It also gets activated when we exercise, which, exercises creates nutrient depletion. So, um, upregulating AMPK also is critical to longevity. Another way to upregulate AMPK is fasting. Um, Fasting is correlated to autophagy, and so is AMPK. So without autophagy, we would die because it's like if you didn't take out the garbage in your house, your living situation would be unlivable. I've talked about it before with if you if you just let like all the garbage out in the streets just proliferate, then you have all the pests coming out. Like it creates a massive problem. There's like streets need to be cleaned, things need to be things need to be cleaned, and they need to be cleaned in your body as well. So your body's constantly doing recycling processes and cleansing processes, and that's why having periods of not eating is very, very important to the body. Autophagy is known as cell death, but it's really just more importantly a cleansing process. Okay, so chapter 6, the crisis of abundance. So here he moves on to, he tells the story of a surgery where he had a patient that, like, they did an extensive interview about his lifestyle, including like how much do you drink? Do you smoke? All this stuff. And when they went in and saw his liver, it was basically cirrhotic. It was just instead of it being a beautiful purple color, it was orange, pink with lots of fat deposits. So the attending kind of turns to him and says, "Oh my goodness, you told me like he rarely drinks alcohol, but it looks like an alcoholic fatty liver." So this is one of the problems of our current time is that there's such an abundance of sugar and such an abundance of refined carbohydrate in our diet and just an abundance of food, period, that we have now developed the livers of alcoholics without being alcoholics. So it's quite problematic. And when we look at lab ranges, and our lab work regular lab work, most basic of lab work, always does ALT and AST, which are liver enzymes, very important to look at. But the ranges have changed over the years as people have gotten progressively less well. So then what's normal is not necessarily healthy or optimal. So for AST and ALT, optimal numbers would be under 20. And that is what everyone should shoot for with their liver enzymes. Okay, so a couple of interesting statistics is that in the 1970s, the average American male weighed 170 pounds. And today's average American male now weighs 200 pounds. So another big problem is metabolic syndrome. So metabolic syndrome is a cluster of things. It's now called Syndrome X. Um, the X factor is technically insulin resistance, insulin being the driver of the bus. Here, insulin is such an important metabolic hormone. But when it's elevated and you have hyperinsulinemia, it creates all kinds of disorders in the body. So we're looking at high blood pressure. We're looking at high triglycerides, low HDL, central adiposity. So the like big tummy in the middle with a waist circumference of more than 40 inches in men and more than 35 in women. And then elevated fasting glucose. So above, it's listed here 110. I'm going to say above 100, but his book says 110. So apparently 90% of Americans now are pre-diabetic. And when you're pre-diabetic, you know you are pre-diabetic. And so it's really important to stay on top of the testing. And even better, now you can go to a third party place and get a continuous glucose monitor, and it is a valuable thing to do for even 2 weeks just to see what glucose is doing. So with high blood pressure, you want it less than 130 over 85. With triglycerides, um, less. So if you have triglycerides higher than 150, that's a problem. So they should ideally, optimally would be double digits. Low HDL would be below 40, so you need to, or below 50 in men. So, or sorry, I have that wrong. Below 40 in men and below 50 in women. Um, so above 50 is good for everybody. And then reducing that central circumference of the waist and getting optimal glucose numbers would be in the 80s, 70s or 80s. That's optimal. Um, so then he goes on to talk about the difference between subcutaneous fat and visceral fat. And actually, Sean O'Mara's talk from Keto Symposium 2024 is on the YouTube, on my YouTube channel for everyone to check out, where he discusses the danger of visceral fat, which is part of that central adiposity, and how to get rid of it. Really, lowering it's lowering overall carbohydrate intake, specifically refined carbohydrates and simple sugars that like candy, candy and all that stuff, like the low-hanging fruit. No pun intended. Um, yeah, I don't think having a piece of fruit is the issue. It is not the issue. Everybody, it is the cakes, the cookies, the candies, the treats, the potato chips, the pretzels, anything packaged, and then it's breads, pastas, all that stuff, as my doctor would say, crumbly foods. And what happens with metabolic syndrome and also just even parts having a couple of these things, it is with the insulin resistance, is that it creates fatty liver. They go hand in hand. It's fatty liver might come first and then insulin resistance, or insulin resistance come first and then it's fatty liver, but they there's a relationship there. And also as a result, you're increasing inflammation in the body, inflammatory cytokines like TNF alpha and the ILs, the different ones, interleukins, like IL-6. So, um, fat storage, fat storage capacity is unlimited, but how we store fat, where we store fat, like subcutaneous fat, is not dangerous the way visceral fat is. We're meant to have some subcutaneous fat. It's protective. But having too much is also unnecessary. We need to tap into that fat storage. So, but a lot of that is also related to genetics. Um, so this is it. I just highly recommend that if you haven't picked up this book, that you do pick up this book. Um, he finishes this chapter with talking about, well, he talks a lot about some other markers like uric acid. Uric acid will be elevated when there is too much fructose. And again, don't mean the fructose from fruit because fruit has actually trace amounts of fructose. But cane sugar has a glucose molecule combined with a fructose molecule. So if you think about drinking a Coca-Cola, which has several grams of sugar, like when we think of sugar, and it's several grams of fructose. And now your body breaks the glucose away from the fructose, utilizes the glucose to make ATP, which is our energy currency, our adenosine triphosphate, but doesn't have the capacity to do anything with the fructose. So it gets shoved into the liver, creating those fat deposits. So when you're having your cakes and your cookies and your potato chips and your Coca-Cola, you are just shoving a whole boatload of fructose that the body cannot handle and was not the same as a banana on a tree or an orange or an apple, not the same at all, and is really harming your liver. Like mm, such an important organ in your body. Such an important organ. So if you stop putting in the salt, your liver will regenerate. Your liver can heal itself. And so it is important to remove, right? It's remove these things from the diet. Um, I mean, what's nice about the book is he really goes into detail on the labs that you should do, homocysteine, why, just why you want to have these lab markers and this data and like what it's helpful and like what it's correlated to. So that's just a summary of where we are now. We'll probably pick up and read 7, 8, 9 for next time and chat about that. Until then, be well.